Yeah, I'm just seeing the chat here from Donna. Roger and Donna are signing it, says. If you're just joining now, I was just saying a minute ago that we're just waiting here right to 6:30 before I get started. You can't see each other. We are not going to have video for you tonight, but I'll be able to hear from you for the public hearing record as we get to the end here, where we have the majority of the time for you guys to speak about this regulation. I'm going to do a little introduction and go through what it's about, high-level overview, and what the public hearing is about and what the regulation's about, etc. So we're just waiting just one more minute and we will get underway. We're live streaming this on YouTube, so if you know of someone who wanted to participate tonight but had trouble with Zoom, they're able to rewatch this on YouTube. So I'll post a link on our website with the YouTube link. Additionally, there were some people who couldn't download the file, I heard, through one of the LSD chairs. I've posted a new link on the website that might be handy or easier for people to use. The other one potentially would have issues with firewall. We are at 6:30 mark now, so I'm going to get started. And again, if people want to speak tonight, there's going to be a portion, the majority of it's going to be dedicated to this after I'm done speaking. So I will get started right now. All right. So this is the public hearing for the Pennfield and Beaver Harbour Planning Area Rural Plan Regulation. Regulation 20-10-010-01. I'm Alex Henderson. I'm a professional certified planner, and I work for the Southwest New Brunswick Service Commission. This is how tonight is going to go. So I'm going to present the background, process, and regulation that we're here to discuss tonight. The majority of tonight, as I said, is about hearing from you, your comments, questions, objections. This is a public hearing of objections. This rural plan cannot become a law until the public have had a chance to weigh in on it. And your record tonight of what you're going to say is going to be sent to the Minister of Local Government and Local Governance Reform, Mr. Allen, who will consider it before he can make this a regulation. We're gonna kind of set a couple ground rules for this. I don't think we have too many people on tonight. I just see we have 8 participants online. So I think roughly 5 minutes speaking time per person would be probably fair. And if you can try to keep your comments to that. As a rule of thumb, like, it's not about the like repetitious sort of comments. If there's one issue that you agree that probably should be changed as a plan, or something that you have objections about, or you're in agreement with, if somebody's already said it, you can just say, I agree with so-and-so. And it's more about getting the full content of what everybody's thinking about. So it's not about the volume of the comments, but really the full picture, full scope of what people are saying and thinking about this. After everybody spoke, I will respond to any questions that come up. So if you're using your speaking time and you ask several questions, I'm going to write them down, but I'm not going to jump in a back and forth conversation with each person, just because it will take much more time to do this meeting tonight if we kind of have that back and forth with each and every person. I can certainly do that with each and every person after tonight if we don't have a fulsome back and forth, and I'm totally happy to do that. So I can post my my phone number is actually posted on the website right under this public hearing notice, and that's my direct line. So if you have a call, if you want to call me and chat about this later, we certainly can. But I'll try to respond to the main stuff tonight. Then we'll conclude the hearing and we'll send the transcript to the minister. This is the whole process in the broad view. So the first thing is that the local district advisory committee requests the rural plan be made. So there's actually 2 LSDs involved here, Pennfield and Beaver Harbour. They both requested a rural plan be made individually and consulted with their advisory committees when they did that. We then take that, we bring it to the province to say, this community is looking to have a rural plan done. And they say, please write a rural plan background study. And then we proceed to do that. We do an analysis of the whole area being considered for a rural plan, or rural plan update in this case, because the Pennfield and Beaver Harbour area does have a rural plan right now. This is actually an overhaul and update to what's already existing. So each and every time we do that major update, though, we do a background study as if we're starting from scratch. We supply that to the province, and then they send out comments and give us opportunity to write a draft regulation, which then gets circulated back to the province and their departments for review and comment, because there's multiple departments that have different forms of legislation and regulations that they administer that interact with land use planning. And so it's important that all people in the province that are involved with regulations and whatnot are having their say into this document before it could ever even reach the public's eye, because we want to make sure it's a reasonable, workable document that doesn't duplicate or undermine the efforts of another important regulation in the province. So once we've had that kind of internal review with the province, and the background study and the draft are complete by the commission, we then send this package on to the province for a final review, and they make final adjustments. We've been in that stage for quite some time with this plan. Actually, we've been I think it's been about a year. There's been some minor tweaks that have been made and adjustments to it in that year's time. The Plan Review Adjust Committee, the PRAC, the local planning commission's advisory committee for the region meets, they discuss it, and they provide views on it. This is actually, I have it here as done. This is going to be happening next week, actually, would be more accurate to say. But the views have been, the ministers requested their views. The public hearing gets advertised, and that has happened. So the advertisement was on our website, but to meet the regulation or the legislation, it was also posted twice in the local newspaper, the St. Croix Courier. And tonight is the public hearing of objections that has been advertised. So as I said, the transcript of tonight gets sent to the minister, and you have 2-week deadline for comments. Now this is the minister can't adopt this regulation for this 2 weeks, but if you don't get your comments in by December 23rd, likely there's going to be still room for you to write in comments. It's unlikely that this will actually be made a regulation December 24th, which would be Christmas Eve. It will be likely in the new year. In fact, they get 6 months. The minister gets 6 months to make this a regulation or not. So it's not a sure thing that's become a regulation, but it is moving along. And this is a key part of this, is to talk to the public, ask the public's views, formally looking for comments, because this is the way the law works, and this is the way these things become regulations. Because probably there's some questions about municipal reform and a rural plan for an LSD. I just wanted to address that quickly before we get into the bulk of the plan. So just so everyone knows, this is not going to have any effect on anything to do with municipal reform. It doesn't make you a municipality. It doesn't stop a municipalization process from happening. It really is a rural plan for an LSD. That said, the question would be, why would you continue on with this process of developing a plan for an LSD when potentially there'll be a new municipal entity covering all these areas? And that is a great question, one which I asked myself to the province, and they said it is important to continue with any rural plans that are still in progress, because even when the municipal entity is formed January 1st, 2023, it's going to take at least a couple of years for that new entity to do their own background study, to do their own research and planning and public meetings, consultations with the province, in order for them to have a whole plan to cover the whole new municipal entity. These LSD rural plans will still have effect while that process is still underway. So the new municipal entities will have, I believe, till 2027 to adopt their own new comprehensive plans for their whole municipal area. So there's going to be some lag between that happening and now. So in the next couple of years. So we and the province are in agreement that it's still very worthwhile to have a new updated rural plan in place for Pennfield and Beaver Harbour. In fact, given all the work has been done, it just makes sense to keep going. If the public's in agreement and the minister agrees, then this could become a regulation. So how did we get here? This is the current plan. It just has one zone, the mixed use zone. It's been in effect since 2010. There was a basic planning statement before that, which was a very thin document, didn't have a lot of guidance on development. This one, the one that's currently in effect, has more guidance on development, but it's not, as you can see, it doesn't prescribe where types of development should go. So there's no direction on where a heavy industrial development should go. There's no direction on where settlement nodes are and where the farming and forestry activities should go. There's no consideration for climate change with this plan. There's no consideration for the fishery in this plan. And it might seem shocking to say that, but there is no consideration for the fishery in this plan. So we wanted to look at some of the address some of these issues for quite some time with this plan. Obviously we work with the community with building permits and building inspections and issuing development permits and so on and so forth, subdivisions. We're well aware what the issues are with planning in Pennfield and Beaver Harbour. We work with you guys on a daily basis. We're also aware of what's happening in trends in industry and what's happening with the demographic trends here. We know what the province is working on and where things are going towards potentially with the statements of public interest that they're developing about planning, ensuring that New Brunswick has really good planning. And so we talked with the LSD chairs of Pennfield and Beaver Harbour when the Beaver Harbour Advisory Committee was still in a functioning state. And we worked with them to talk through the issues and look at different options and solutions. So there was actually quite a number of consultations that were informal, not like tonight, which is more formal. And these happened in June of 2019 and then October of 2020. As October, like now, post-COVID, the in-person meeting we just can't do it. And I wish we could do it tonight. It's just we have to do it online, and that's unfortunate because not everybody likes this format, and I understand why. But we had to do this post-COVID this way, and I unfortunately just did not have a choice with that. Okay, so diving right in. Overall objectives. So these are the general direction of where we had a sense of where the community wanted to take this itself with future development and how it wants to be in, how it envisions itself in the future, what it values, what it wants to protect, what it wants to be like. And these are the general statements of the general objectives of the plan to get a sense of what it's all about. Preserve and enhance beauty, environment, and rural character. To regulate development so it's fiscally and ecologically sustainable. Balance growth opportunities between different land uses to minimize conflict between land uses. Establishing standards for the erection of building and structure, so setbacks. So these are the things that this rural plan is really going to tackle in detail. So I'm going to go through some of the policies. These are the specific matters that are looking to be addressed in this rural plan that are elaborations and more detail than these general objectives. So these policies deal with a number of areas that rural plans must cover according to the Community Planning Act. So policies on residential development, keep incompatible non-residential uses out of residential zones, meaning you're not going to have major industry show up in the middle of a bunch of houses that have developed over time. You want to have that kind of area marked out as rural residential, coastal residential, what it is. Sorry. Concentrating growth on appropriate accesses, avoiding sprawl or inadequate private accesses. There's a number of issues with the way accesses can interact with development. For example, if you don't have a road that's maintained by the Department of Transportation, leads to all kinds of issues. You may have property and then subdividing that property becomes next to impossible without upgrading the whole length of road. Well, we should have that reflected in the zoning, that you're in an area that's more suitable for agriculture or forestry as opposed to a residential subdivision. Allowing all manner of compatible home-based business. So it needs to be very flexible. A lot of people are working from home, and a lot of home-based business activity should be encouraged, helps supplement income, helps diversify all the business services in the region. It shouldn't be discouraged, but there's a way to describe what's compatible and what isn't. Is a junkyard a home-based business? Well, no. But maybe doing a small workshop to build furniture or doing types of activities like that can be made compatible, and there's rules about how this would work. Larger subdivisions follow residential cluster development. So currently, if you're doing a large scale subdivision, your only option is do 1 acre lots, 1 acre lots, 1 acre lots. And it's a lot of frontage, a lot of road to put in. It becomes, consumes a lot of land. It's expensive. And also it is not the best for the environment. With residential cluster, you can concentrate the development more in smaller areas while preserving a larger amount of the original parcel as natural or agricultural or open space. So this is an interesting new innovation in this rural plan that's being proposed. And I'll go into detail about it. Commercial tourism. So looking to limit environmental impacts and concentrating development for commercial along existing settlement nodes. So Route 175, the old highway, Beaver, Harbour. These are identified communities within the planning area that have a higher concentration and density. They already have commercial services, or in the case of Beaver Harbour, used to have quite a lot. It would be nice to allow that to keep flourishing and or come back and be reinvigorated in some fashion. So identifying these areas where you could have this type of development. Industrial, there's light industrial in the planning area already, and it makes sense to zone that where it already exists. And there's also pressures from heavy industry, so quarries and other types of extractive industries, and where these might make an app, these might be looking to be placed anywhere in the planning district, and there's no guidance on where they should go. This plan calls for specific guidance and pre-zones areas which are far away from residential areas and are suitable based on a number of criteria, including access, potential for contamination into watersheds and reducing that potential, and looking at all kinds of other factors that lead to good pre-planning when it comes to heavy industry, because we don't want to see heavy industry showing up in the middle of a residential area, as we talked about. So this allows for some regulations there. Screening buffer. So if there is going to be a development, then there needs to be some visual screening between it to limit visual impact, limit smells, noises that do result from industrial development. And this rural plan allows for these types of things to be in place. Otherwise, places that don't have rural plans, there is nothing that can force an industry to put up fences or leave a buffer of trees between you and their property. So this is what rural plans can do. Institutional, encouraging uses that are social, religious, cultural to be in appropriate locations. So this can be done throughout the planning area. But when you get into large scale institutional, big institutional facilities of one kind or another, and that can include all types of government services or nonprofit social services. These should be in areas that are more on the commercial side, so you don't have the impacts from the traffic, et cetera, related to these bigger, larger institutional uses. They're rare, but they can happen. So looking at that as a pre-planning sort of activity or pre-planning policy, so to speak. Recreational open space, encouraging recreational uses throughout the planning area, preserving open space and passive recreation uses. So you'll see this come up in the zoning in various ways. Encourage trails for motorized and active transportation in large developments. So when there's a proposal for a large development, they have to provide all types of services. And one of the things this rural plan would call for is to have consideration for trails. Trails could include trails for ATVs, snowmobile, or they could be trails for greenway users. And there should be some accommodation for both, because both are popular forms of recreation and they have their proper place in this planning area for sure. Resource uses, protecting agricultural lands and mineral deposits from residential encroachment. So what this means is sometimes when you have these valuable agricultural soils or mineral deposits, residential development can actually stifle that from being utilized. And one of the things that planning ought to do in rural New Brunswick is find locations that are suitable for residential, find locations that are suitable for traditional rural resource activities, because we will lose this resource base if we develop over top of it. Supporting sustainable land management generally, encouraging the development of fisheries and aquaculture. As I said, the current rural plan doesn't even mention these terms, and each and every time there's a proposal for this, it's a little bit of a challenge to get the permit and get the approval to do it, because the rural plan, when it was written, didn't contemplate on-land aquaculture, for example. That's a newer and modern innovation. So looking at ways to do that appropriately. So not every location should have a lobster holding facility, for example. We looked at this and very thoughtfully looked at this question because this has come up before in Beaver Harbour. Protection of water supplies. No development that depletes or degrades water supplies. We actually have a zone that is on the well field for Black's Harbour. Currently, there's no regulation that protects that well field. It potentially could be developed, but the zone here would actually be the first real step towards recognizing and protecting that watershed, well field, sorry, I should say. There may be some further efforts from Department of Environment later on, but for now, this is a step towards that. And we also talked about zoning potential incompatible uses away from important watershed recharge areas. One thing this plan also does is recognize the value of the archaeological artifacts that are in the ground that are here, that have been here for thousands of years from the Indigenous people. So there is an importance to recognize that quarries and gravel pits could have an impact on these, and having archaeological impact assessments done when that department deems necessary. Not the commission, we don't have that kind of knowledge, but we would reference these types of development applications to that appropriate department to see if there's potential for archaeological artifacts. And that's something we can't do currently, but we could do with this new this rural plan regulation. And it is only appropriate to recognize the history and archaeology of the area, as well as just generally respecting the history of the area. It has an amazing history in Beaver Harbour, and looking at those historical resources and preserving those as well as part of the plan. Conservation of the physical environment, looking at impacts of climate change. So we have a zone now that goes along the water. It doesn't limit or restrict development completely, but what it does is set some standards. If you're going to develop in an area that's really low lying, we need to think about what that might mean in the next 40 years, because you don't want to have a house that gets inundated in a high tide or in a big storm surge. We want to make sure that living areas are built above a certain elevation, and we have that data, and it makes sense to use it. So you'll see that you can develop near the water. There's no setback requirement from the water, but you have to build up. And we feel that is a good compromise between people wanting to be close to the water, but then taking consideration that climate change is real and it will affect this planning area. Minimizing impact on air and water. Generally, we have all kinds of considerations for this. Preserving biodiversity, having a conservation zone around important watersheds, water courses and wetlands. Development in areas that physical environment allows it. So things that are too steep, marshy, subject to flooding, looking at how you can address those and direct development elsewhere. So we have a bunch of considerations for the fishery, as I talked about. And one of the things which we wanted to do is make sure that the traditional fishery was not being constrained by planning. At the same time, recognizing that traditional fishery and modern fisheries, there's a line there where it becomes industrial. So trying to determine that, we looked at some best practices, including Graham and Ann's rural plan, and as well as other places across the Fundy Coast. And one of the things we suggested is this: under 200 square meters, where it's not lobster holding, not warehousing, not seafood processing, where it's simply a place for a fisher person to store their catch temporarily in sealed, closed, refrigerated, live tanks, and a place where they can store their nets, store their goods. This should be allowed in every zone. And it has some conditions, not to become junkyard, not to become noxious to neighbors. There's several conditions related to it, but reasonable, doable conditions that will work for the smaller scale fishery. In all the rural areas as well, all the rural residential, hobby farming, small scale farming should be permitted. It is a lively part of the planning area that people want to do small scale and hobby farming, and it should be allowed. This is different than having a pig barn and having an industrial scale farm that has its own zone, the agriculture and forestry zone. But this type of use should be permitted in every residential area. Home-based business industries of limited size scale, limited tourism uses. So massive campgrounds could be limited with terms and conditions. That's why it's subject to terms and conditions, but smaller scale tourist developments, having a small Airbnb, cabin, etc. These things can be encouraged as providing more services and ways to supplement income for people in the area. We talked about the industrial zone. So a pre-planned heavy industrial zone to accommodate existing or potential industrial uses. So instead of having no guidance as the current rural plan has, this actually offers very, very specific guidance and locations that are pre-planned that could be useful for industrial development. We need industrial development. It's part of our society to have goods and services produced in industry. So it needs to be somewhere, and we need to find those locations, and that's something we set out to do as planners. But we also want to have good conditions for this. So we have talked about landscaping and buffers around the property's edge to protect surrounding land uses, directing salvage yards and high impact processing plants to this heavy industrial zone. So can be in that zone and not showing up in your neighborhood. We have zoned this as well, as we talked about, where there's not a lot of residential built up already. It can only be in areas that are very sparsely populated for it to work. Good road access we talked about, and also the limiting any danger to the aquifer. The mixed use zone. So this is a zone that's in those settlement nodes I was talking about. The 175, the old highway, used to have several motels, and it still has many restaurants and gas stations. It's a settlement node, and it's kind of a center of the Pennfield community. Beaver Harbour as well has its own community, and these are areas that mixed use zoning can work. You can do high traffic commercial uses like this gas stations, restaurants, or some light industry. And this would be subject to terms and conditions because it kind of depends on the type of light industry, whether it could be appropriate or not in this area. It is kind of a transition between commercial and industrial. It's not heavy industrial in any means, but light industry with conditions applied to protect the surrounding properties. No junkyards or heavy industrial permitted, as I talked about. And this zone will also prevent multifamily, large-scale mobile home parks, tourism uses, campgrounds. So commercial, higher impact, but it's in areas that have had this development already. And we talked about the larger institutional uses. Agriculture, forestry. So this is a zone that's made to protect and preserve areas for traditional rural business and resource sector. So we're talking about keeping properties larger, 2 hectares. This is not designed for rural and rural residential subdivisions that are 1 acre lots. This is meant to be for farming and large scale forestry and small scale forestry and everything in between. It's a zone that covers most of the plan area. This is in the brown color you'll see. But if you have a property in here that is undersized, you can still use it. It's not going to be something that's going to be encouraged to do going forward. We want to see these areas kept intact, but you can certainly still use lots that exist in this area if they're under that. We looked at the idea of making this residential being subservient to the traditional rural resource area, because when people are moving into these areas and they have a belief that, you know, this is a residential area, nobody should have farming around me, nobody should have noisy chainsaws around me. This is saying that no, this zone is about these rural resource activities first. So you got to do that on your property as well. If you're going to develop something in this zone, it's got to be you're going into the zone to start a farm or to start some rural industry, or rural resource activity rather. And that's your main purpose for being in this zone. And this is really what the predominant land use is already in these areas. And we also have reciprocal setbacks for large livestock operations. So there's none right now, but if there ever was going to be a large livestock operation, there needs to be some marker on the planning map showing this. And this plan contemplates the idea that there be a reciprocal setback, meaning if there's a large hog barn in the planning area in an appropriate zone, then residential encroachment should not be taking place around it because it can affect the viability of that operation for the farmer. We also talked about the idea of an intensive resource development zone. So where there's mineral rights and there's mineral deposits that are likelihood of being extracted, there should be accommodations for this. Much of this is in crown lands far away from residential areas, and I'll show you where this is. But it's not necessarily important for us as a commission to be taking these developers through rezoning application to do this. So the thought was to make this pre-zoned for these uses because the location of these uses is appropriate for that type of activity. We do need minerals, we do need to consider that, but those need to be in the appropriate location. So the idea being that this is not going to be in a residential area, this is quite far away from residential zones. So we talked about the compatibility issues around mining. Environmentally sensitive zone. This is green zone you'll see on the map. And this is around much of the water courses, aquifer recharge areas, and other important environmental sensitive areas. We consulted with the Department of Environment on this, and it complements existing regulations. It doesn't replace those regulations. It works with those regulations and adds provisions for things like tree preservation, development limitations. So meaning you can do residential development even in this environmentally sensitive zone, but it's limited and not high impact types of uses that could have potential for pollution, for example, industrial, etc. So looking at things in this zone as well related to the coastal development, making sure that it's of the appropriate level, taking consideration sea level rise in the future and the high tide storm surges that will come with that. So we talked about the pollution, tree clearing. Yeah, tree clearing. This is one of the things where you can do tree clearing in this zone, but it's got to be done in a way that protects that water course or sensitive environmental area from erosion, maintains habitats, natural aesthetics. So the limit on tree removal, you can remove up to 25% of the trees in the zone with a site plan. Or if there's a tree that's going to fall down, it's an individual tree, that's permitted by right. You don't have to ask anyone's permission. That's just needs to come down. But in this case, if you're doing large scale clearing, you need to do it with a site plan. So this keeps some of the aesthetics, the natural environment quality intact. We have the rural residential zone, which is the main residential zone, general suburban type of residential zone. This is where residential use is primary, all other things are secondary, home-based business industry. And industry in that case means home-based industry like craftsmen. Institutional uses are permitted, minimum 1 acre lots, conservation subdivisions are optional. And that's the type of subdivision we're preserving some of the lot, concentrating the development. Single family in-law suites, garden suites up to 4 dwelling units in a building are permitted. This is zoned in areas where suburban type development exists already near community nodes. So it's an area where more rural residential development could be accommodated. And you can do a lot of general business activity still in this zone. So hobby farming, home-based business, small-scale fishery, etc. Now we have another zone. This is an interesting one where it's predominantly water-oriented residential development. So there's a lot of pressure right now for waterfront properties to be residential, and there's a risk that some of the pressure for residential development will take up the entirety of the waterfront. But this should be limited to these zones, because these are where it's already taken place. And some more of these types of developments, these kinds of water-oriented homes, should be located in this zone, and leave other parts of the waterfront for working harbors, and the fisheries that rely on warehousing, industrial support services for the fishery. But these need to be separated, so because there's a conflict between people who are moving here to be in the water-oriented residential and people who've been here working in traditional fisheries. And there needs to be a recognition that both have a place and both need their zones. And this is a zone for that. And this is designed for homes, camps. You can do tourism uses, hobby farms, small scale fisheries. We talked about every zone. It also limits the types of developments, because a lot of the homes in these areas are some are very large homes, and some are looking to have investments protected and so on. So a very old mobile home showing up next to this is going to create a land use conflict of a different sort. So this is where consideration was given for this, a little bit more restrictions on the types of development, industrial or residential development that could happen here. Given that it's oceanfront residential, and this is an active and high pressure development type right now in the planning area. So there is an option for doing bare land condo, the large scale subdivisions that are done by preserving much of the original parcel land as natural or another type of open space use. So limiting the amount of subdivision that can happen here in the kind of way that takes up the entirety of the waterfront, or takes up a huge tract of land and leaves a path of a lot of trees removed and some destruction to the environment. So encouraging protection of the environment while also accommodating this type of use, because it is popular and it is high demand. So looking closely at the zoning map, this is Beaver Harbour, and you can see the types of zones that are here. The bright yellow is the rural residential zone. The light blue is the mixed use zone, where you could do a light industry with terms and conditions. So you can see where the old cannery is in the mixed use zone, the light blue. The light green is the coastal residential zone. So this is area where that water-oriented residential is predominant. And then the brown being the agriculture forestry, and the dark green being the environmentally sensitive zone. And you don't have any of the intensive resource development zone here because it's too close to residential. And we look further out, Pennfield, the 175 Route 1. You see Woodwork Cove. Here we have a light blue zone kind of in this, get a pen here, I'll show you guys. Pardon me, just give me a minute. Oh. Around here, we got a light industrial zone. We have a heavier industrial zone here near the highway interchange. This is an existing heavy industrial use. And there's some here that are Latang River here, Mealy Road. There's some industrial uses along here. So light or heavy industrial uses there. So if you were next to one of these, there's another one. This is an existing quarry. If you're next to one of these, there are conditions for how they would operate. It's not that they can develop right to the property line. They have to leave buffers, they'd have to leave screening. And that's what this rural plan contemplates and allows. Let's exit out of this, next screen. Oh, I got all these drawings there, sorry about that. And this is the northern part of the planning area. So these dotted areas is where that intensive resource development overlay is, and that's quite far away from all residential areas. So not much is at all close to anyone. All right, so I'm going to end here. Going back to where we are, we're now at the point where we want to ask the public what their views are, and I want to ask everybody who wishes to speak to use the raise hand button. So this is the button that has a little hand picture. If you click on that, I'm going to promote you to a speaking role and turn it over to you. I'm just looking for anybody who wants to speak tonight. Okay, I got Donna here. I'm going to go in a first come, first serve. So whoever's next, please feel free to raise your hand. All right, Donna, just hope your mic's unmuted, but here we go.
Okay, I think we're up now, but I would like to turn things over to Roger, who would like to say a few words.
Donna, we can't hear you. So if you're trying to speak, your microphone might be muted.
I don't know what's wrong.
You're mute.
No, I'm not on mute. No. We're open, Alex.
I still can't hear you, Donna. I don't know if other folks can hear you. I apologize. Oh, other people can hear you, but I can't for some reason. Okay, why don't, let me just see, there might be something wrong with my microphone here. I apologize, everyone. Can you try speaking again, Donna?
Okay, can you hear me now, Alex?
Yes, I'm so sorry. That was my microphone. Go ahead.
Not a problem at all. I would like to turn things over to Roger. He has a few things to say today.
Okay, not very many, Alex. This is Roger, Croco, Beaver, Harbour. We have followed this. Could you just take that off? Okay, I can see Alex now. We had you blocked out. Sorry. We have been following this, both Donna and I, for well over a year, as you know. And we're finally feeling we are getting somewhere. You are getting somewhere. Your team has really worked on this. You have been very cooperative, and we realize the pressures from all over the place that would enter into any plan, your decision, and even up to the minister finally putting this regulation as approved. So Alex, I don't think Donna and I have much more to say than we do support this in the way you have presented it. And we look forward to the future months to see this through to the end result and approval. So that's really all I have to say, Alex. And you guys and all your team have really worked at it.
All right. Well, thanks, Roger. And is that, Don, are you done speaking as well, or?
Yeah, what he said.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, I'll go to the next person. It looks like there in the chat, there was Helen Carter. She didn't, Helen, if you want to speak and just do the raise hand, but I can read your question. It was, so are you saying if you have 100 acres of property and want to build a few houses, it has to be maintained by the government? Could it remain private? And I will circle back to this question at the end. And if you want to speak to that, Helen, you could certainly raise your hand and I will allow you to, or I'll just put you on a speaking role. If you want to unmute yourself here, you can go ahead. But if not, I won't. You can go ahead. No, okay, I guess you don't want to.
No, I'm trying to fix it.
Okay.
No, I was just, my question was, so if I'm just trying to figure out if this was what you meant, that if you had, say, your own property and you wanted to build like a few houses on your own property, I just wondered about the private road. Does it have to be maintained by government? Is that what you're saying now, or it can still remain a private road? Because there are a few housing areas in Pennfield and this area that have private dwellings that aren't maintained by the government. They're maintained by the private owners. The roads are. I just wondered what that's, is it going to be all of those housing developments now have to be maintained by government?
I don't have a lot of people who've raised their hand right now. So you know what? I think I'm gonna just respond to your question right away. Normally I would wait to the end, but if we had a whole bunch of people wanted to speak, I might have taken your question at the end. So I think I'll just address it now. No, certainly there's still gonna be private access subdivisions. Not every regional service commission is comfortable with approving private accesses, but our commission in the Southwest has historically been comfortable with them. So I don't foresee them going away. I think they're a good way to do development in a lower impact, lower cost way, and it actually takes some of the burden off of the general taxpayer to maintain those private accesses. There can be problems with them though. We know when people buy into them, sometimes they don't realize the government's not maintaining them, and they'll put pressure on the department to pave them and to take care of them, have their garbage picked up at their house, and it's inconsistent as to whether they get plowed or not, or if garbage being picked up there or not. So there's a lot of issues there. But on the whole, we still think that they have a place. And what we actually specified here, I'm going to do a share screen on the regulation itself. I'm going to show you the section. If everybody can see this here, show you the policy as it's worded right now. All right. Okay. So the policy of this plan would be that it's a policy to concentrate residential growth areas to maintain public roads, or to consider private access subdivisions, subject to long-term maintenance agreements, emergency vehicle access, and accessibility to natural assets and resources. So what that means in regular talk is, yeah, we're still going to be approving private access subdivisions, but we want to see a little bit better standards in this planning area so that considerations for, say, access to water for the back lots is considered. So if you buy into a subdivision that's next to a lake or a river, you're not prohibited from getting a canoe down into the water, for example. Two, and more important, that an emergency vehicle could get down there if someone was in an emergency. Right now, there's inconsistent methodologies for how people do these private accesses. Some are pretty formal. Like there's a subdivision in the north part of Lake Utopia, a very formal road association that maintains the road. But other places in Utopia or in other places, sorry, in the planning area we're actually talking about, it's very inconsistent, and some people don't have regular or consistent access that can be used all year round, or you might not be able to get a fire truck anywhere close to your house because of it. So there's problems with it. So we want to make sure that standards are increasing and getting better. So new developments are, 6 meter wide travel lane, a way for an emergency vehicle to turn around so they're not trapped going down there. Gradients are appropriate for larger emergency vehicles to get down, etc. So not having to have the government maintain it, because there's value in it being private, but also making sure that there's reasonable standards for these private access subdivisions, and that people are really well aware that they're not going to become public roads unless they bring it up to a municipal or a government standard. Does that answer your question, Helen?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so I have Nigel Dearsley. I'm going to promote you to speaking role. Nigel, if you want to unmute yourself.
There we go.
I'll just wait. Oh, there you go.
Oh, hi, actually it's my wife Tessa. We've just moved into Eldridge Lane Extension, but she has a question.
Hello, Alex. It's Tessa here. I found this really interesting, and thank you for all your explanations. But as Nigel said, we are very, very new to the area, so you'll have to forgive me if this question perhaps may be looked on as redundant. I don't know. But I was just interested in all the considerations that were being taken. There was no mention of public access. And I'm just thinking, with future development, surely public access to the beaches that are there, or any other points of interest, should be protected, or if not already there, should be encouraged and put into future plans.
Yeah, so like with Helen before you, I'm going to just respond right away. It is a good point, and it's going to be part of the transcript going to the minister. But one of the things that we have as a limitation right now with rural New Brunswick is there's not a same capacity there in local service districts to be taking on a lot of land for public purposes. So if you're in a municipality and you do a development, you do a subdivision, you need to generally give about 8% of the total area to the municipality for land for public purposes. And there'll normally be considerations for, trails to water and such and so forth. We've tried to do a little bit with what we can right now in the current status quo, so to speak, but things are going to change with municipal reform, and there may be ways to increase this towards what you're talking about, I think. But I think what for a limited getting close to what you're talking about, what we, like I just said with Helen there, encouraging access for the subdivision, for the lot owners to make sure they all have access to the water in a private subdivision, that's essential. If we do have a public road subdivision in the planning area, I could definitely look at it, but my understanding is the land for public purposes is not something the department really wants to get its hands on. Potentially we could look at it, but we certainly agree with the planning thinking you're describing. That was ideal, but there's some governance structure right now, the current LSD format, that's very difficult to take on a lot of these lands and trails and who looks after them, etc. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes, it does. But I'm not thinking so much sort of taking on land, but just sort of preserving the areas of beauty. I'm just thinking of the beaches particularly, I suppose, because we live near there. But if more development takes place near or on the beach, by the beaches, it could limit public access that is already in existence on those beaches. And it would limit the public's ability to enjoy all this beautiful scenery and nature that we have. And I just wonder if it's not, as you were saying, if it's not put into the provision, then it could be very well overstepped, couldn't it?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. I guess there's some means of getting towards preserving that the aesthetic quality of beaches is there with the preservation of trees and so forth, which is new in this plan. That never, you can clear cut right now. Like it's not, well, sorry, previous to this public hearing, the public hearing actually puts a development freeze on a number of things that we are talking about, but the tree cutting right down to the water's edge has been something that you've been able to do, for example. You still have access to the intertidal zone that's not private, unless it's a water lot, which they're few and far between. So that's not affected by this plan. That's beyond the high water mark. But in New Brunswick, there's not really a lot we can do with regard to, like, let's say, preserving the coastline for a public access, like in terms of like designating a trail. It would require a number of things which are very difficult to accomplish without having a local government in place that's looking to do an infrastructure, like a trail infrastructure project where they purchase or expropriate land along the waterfront. It's a ways away from that in the current status quo of the LSD system. It wouldn't be quite possible, to be honest.
Thank you very much for your explanation, Alex. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Let's move on to the next person. Oh, the hand just dropped. So we had one hand raised, and now we have no more hands that are raised. So if anybody wants to speak, oh, there it is, Alan. Alan, you just want to unmute yourself? Might just take a minute here.
Good evening. My name is Alan Kurz. I'm speaking from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it's nice to be with you. Karin and I have property, and we are just thrilled to hear of the plan that you're presenting with the draft and concept, which is holistic and based on reasonable development and preservation. We're all for it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Alan. Okay. We also have, let's see, no, we're just currently, the folks raising their hand right now have spoken. If there's anybody else who wishes to speak, if you can chat into the chat box or use the raise hand, and I will promote you to speaking role. Otherwise, if we are all done tonight, the best thing to do would be to write in your comments, concerns, objections, support. You can write to my email and I'll forward it to the minister. My email is alex.henderson@snbsc.ca. And more of that information can be found on our website. I'm going to post this link to the video tonight on the website. As well, you'll be able to find multiple ways to download the regulation on the map. And again, there's certainly 2 weeks, definitely, and likely a bit more for you to write in your views to the minister who's going to make the decision. So I'm going to give one last chance for anybody who wishes to speak. Want to raise your hand or type into chat? I'll wait 1 minute. But otherwise, I think I'm going to conclude this public hearing. Looks like we have no more people who wish to speak tonight. So I will thank everybody who's attended, and please, again, feel free to reach out to me. Your LSD chairs, your LSD chair, Wayne McQuarrie, he's online tonight. He also would be a good contact, but anybody reach out to me, 466-3141. I'll happy to chat longer if you wish. Have a good night.